I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Canada will observe the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on Thursday. Ottawa has created the new September 30th statutory holiday. Schools, businesses, and different levels of government will observe the day, which will also be known as Orange Shirt Day. Canadians are being urged to hold a moment of silence at 2:15 p.m. It marks the grim discovery of 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops, BC, and the horrific realities that Indigenous children had to live with while being forced to attend residential schools. The Liberals and New Democrats have been declared the winners in two hotly contested ridings in BC. It was too close to call on election night, but the Liberals have won Richmond Centre, while the NDP picks up Nanaimo Ladysmith. Mail-in ballots for several ridings are still being tallied, but the final seat count is now all but finalized. The Liberals return to the House of Commons with 158 seats, the Conservatives 119, 33 for the Bloc Québécois, and 25 for the New Democrats. The Green Party won 2 seats, and there is one independent. Well, as mentioned, there will be a new independent member of Parliament when Ottawa gets back to business. Kevin Vuong was elected in downtown Toronto's Spadina-Fort York riding. He was dropped from the Liberal Party just 2 days before the election. The Toronto Star reported that Mr. Vuong had been charged with sexual assault in 2019, though the charge was later dropped. Annamie Paul is stepping down as leader of the Green Party of Canada. Ms. Paul announced her resignation in Toronto this morning. This comes a week after the federal election that saw her party's share of the popular vote drop significantly. Ms. Paul came in 4th in Toronto Centre, which is her third failed attempt to win the riding. The Greens also drew 2.3% of the popular vote, which is less than half of the 6.55% that they received in the previous election. Former ambassador to China, Guy Saint-Jacques, says the events leading up to the return of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor to Canada have severely tarnished China's reputation. He says the Chinese were so eager to get Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou back that they dropped all pretensions that the men had been arrested for good reasons. Mr. Spavor and Mr. Kovrig were released after being held in Chinese prison for more than 1,000 days. This was in apparent retaliation for Canada's arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. A Montreal-based think tank has survey results indicating that tensions are rising across Canada between people who are vaccinated against COVID-19 and those who are not. Association of Canadian Studies President Jack Jedwab says the Leger polling company surveyed more than 1,500 people online earlier this month. It found more than 3 out of 4 respondents held negative views toward unvaccinated people, considering them irresponsible and selfish. He says there is tension playing out among family members, friends, and co-workers on the issue, and it is creating friction. The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops is hoping there is a turning point in the Church's relations with Indigenous peoples. The bishops have apologized unequivocally for the abuses committed by members of the church community who were involved in running residential schools. The discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves prompted calls for the Church to release records that could help to identify the children. It is believed they were buried, often without their families ever being told of their deaths. Well, meanwhile, for 1 week starting on Thursday, Tim Hortons is going to donate 100% of the price of orange sprinkled donuts. The funds will go to the Orange Shirt Society and the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. This spring, the Tims near the grounds of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in BC became an unofficial community gathering place for mourning, reflection, and support. This comes after the remains of 215 missing children were found. The discovery prompted a group of Indigenous Tim Hortons owners to launch a working group and develop the fundraising idea. The Commission of Inquiry investigating the mass killing that claimed 22 lives in Nova Scotia has held the first of 4 so-called open houses. Commission Chair Michael MacDonald, a former Nova Scotia chief, says the Commission's role is not to lay blame or find criminal or civil liability. In April 2020, a gunman disguised as a Mountie was able to evade police for 13 hours before he was shot and killed. 48-year-old RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson died in the line of duty. Well, meanwhile, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg held a memorial service on Sunday in honor of fallen police and peace officers. Among those honored this year was Constable Shelby Patton, a Saskatchewan Mountie who was killed on the job earlier this year. Constable Patton, who was stationed in Indian Head, was struck and killed by a vehicle he pulled over in a traffic stop in Wolseley on June 12th. The last Sunday of September has been recognized as Police and Peace Officers National Memorial Day since 1998. All right, we'll be back after the break with one expert's considerations for Canada's next defense minister. We'll speak with Charlotte Duval-Lantoine, fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, up next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is hearing from several experts on sexual misconduct in the military to consider a woman as defense minister as he builds a new cabinet. The calls are based on a belief that Harjit Sajjan has lost credibility when it comes to addressing what senior commanders themselves have described as an existential crisis within the Canadian Armed Forces. Charlotte Duval-Lantoine of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute says appointing a woman could bring new perspectives to the portfolio. But she cautions that tying a female defense minister's appointment to the current crisis could undermine her competence and see the blame put on her if the military fights culture change. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is Ms. Charlotte Duval-Lantoine herself. She is the Ottawa Operations Manager and a Fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me today.
So let's start with a quick overview of the military's record of handling cases of sexual misconduct and why experts are calling for a new defense minister in the first place.
So we have seen for the past 3 decades quite an inaptitude of really dealing with prevention and response to sexual misconduct issues. And we have seen since the spring of 2021, the Minister of National Defense, at the time, Harjit Sajjan, quite unable to really gain momentum and to really move forward on this issue, especially since the Deschamps report in 2015.
And you say, along with other experts, that appointing a woman can provide new perspectives to this portfolio. So can you tell us a little bit more about these perspectives here?
I think that a woman could bring new perspectives because she has different lived experience, but I mean that in terms of like the general defense portfolio and not just the issue of sexual misconduct. I have a problem with just tying a woman to the issue of sexual misconduct because it gives the impression that only a woman can deal with that problem when it's actually not the case. What we need is a more forceful defense minister that is able to really direct the Canadian Armed Forces in their efforts to change the culture.
So this seems like a very tricky situation, ma'am. You previously indicated that tying the defense minister's appointment to sexual misconduct may actually undermine her competence. So what do you mean by this, and how can we go around the situation here?
So the issue is that what we call the glass cliff, which means that we appoint a woman in time of crisis, and then when she is not able to change the culture or like address a crisis, we tend not to appoint a woman in that position for a long time, even though it is not the fact that it is a woman that could per se, that could address the issue. It is more an institutional problem and a problem of civilian governance of the Canadian Armed Forces. So to go around this, we need to really have a government that asks itself questions about what it needs to do to better improve its relationship with the Canadian Armed Forces and what it requires for the Canadian Armed Forces to really change its culture long term.
All right, ma'am. Well, coming off the heels of the federal election, how can our new government set up the next defense minister for success in managing this very difficult portfolio, regardless of their gender?
I think that we need to ask ourselves the question of whether our governance system of our defense portfolio is working today. We have an integrated defense department, which is fine, but we have seen defense ministers trying to take more of a laissez-faire approach to some issues within the military. We need a defense minister that actually directs the Canadian Armed Forces in their effort and monitors them throughout the process. Having a stronger parliamentary committee would be helpful as well. And unfortunately, we have seen the failure of it in the past few months. So we really need to have more proactive members of parliament and more proactive minister, like we have seen after the Somalia Commission of Inquiry, where you have Minister Doug Young being very proactive in pursuing reforms within the Canadian Armed Forces.
All right, ma'am, just about a minute left. But in 1993, the first and only female defense minister in Canada was Miss Kim Campbell. But that was just about for 6 months. So can you tell us a little bit about how she governed, and has anything changed since then?
So Kim Campbell, like, there is a lot of politics involved in the fact that she was defense minister for only 3 years, but she came at a time that was very difficult for the Canadian Armed Forces. You had budget cuts, you had the Somalia affair that was blowing up at the time, and you also had gender integration. And what we have seen is that, as most other defense minister at the time, she was quite laid back. She was leaving the chief of the defense staff really leading what the Canadian Armed Forces needed to be done within their own culture. And it is quite understandable, since we consider the Canadian Armed Forces as a profession that needs to regulate itself.
Next, we have an interview with Chief Elmer St. Pierre of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. Stay with us. Today marks the first annual National Day of Truth and Reconciliation in Canada. This day provides an opportunity for all Canadians to recognize and commemorate the tragic history and ongoing legacy of residential schools. This federal statutory holiday will also coincide with Orange Shirt Day. The day was created by an Indigenous-led grassroots movement to honor those who survived Indian residential schools and to remember those who did not. The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation also allows Canadians to look toward the future of Indigenous reconciliation within Canada. With us today to talk more on this is Mr. Elmer St. Pierre, the National Chief for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. Welcome to Forum Daily, Chief St. Pierre.
Thank you very much.
Now, what does the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation mean to you, as well as the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples as a whole?
Today is a very sad day. We need to remember the children that went to these schools but never returned.
Right, sir. And can you speak a little bit about the residential school system, how it impacted you and the members of your own community itself?
Well, with CAP and our communities, the impact was they took our children away from us. And family within our community is the most important thing. It gives us that's where we learn our culture, our tradition, as well as it's a gathering for us. And with that, it took a lot away from our families. And a lot of our families are still suffering over this, the ones where the children never come home.
And what does the future of reconciliation in Canada look like for you, sir?
Well, once we get things rolling and the government working, and as well as our own people working toward it, it's a rebuilding of our nation. And we want to have all of our Indigenous people, no matter who they are, is to have a genuine life and don't have to worry about this ever happening again.
All right, sir. So what are some next steps that the Canadian government needs to take in order to reach this particular goal?
Well, one of the big things is the government has to act on the Cap Daniels case, which was handed down today. This year is their 5th anniversary of that. And in that, the Cap Daniels, they really put some emphasis on the government to act on this. And that's the big thing. We got to get the Liberal government to talk to all of the Indigenous people, communities, not just a couple of them. And we really need him the Prime Minister, to talk to CAP to see where we can go with this.
All right, sir. And what about the individual Canadians that are watching this interview right now? What kind of steps can they take to aid the process of reconciliation?
Well, what I see is that all the other Canadians, they have to learn. They have to learn about the survivor or the residential schools, when it started and when it ended. I believe it was 1998 is when it ended, which is not that far, past us. And unfortunately, it was Mr. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the last one to start it, the last 4 schools, residential schools. And if we can study the history, all the other Canadians, all of us, there's some Aboriginal people that don't really know the history neither. So if we all studied that history and find out where things went wrong and why did it go wrong, then hopefully that the people will understand, okay, this is a big mistake. Something's got to be done.
Yes, sir. Well, some very important history to learn there, sir. Just about 30 seconds left in this interview. But before we go, tell us a little bit more about the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, their mission and goals for the future.
The Congress of Aboriginal People, we've been around for 50 years. Actually, this year is our 50th anniversary. And our goal is always to fight for our grassroots people and to make sure they have exactly what they need, the education, housing, and hopefully, again, we need to talk to the Prime Minister. He's been in office for 6 years. He's never reached out to us. I've been in office for 1 year. Next week, I'm in 1 year, and he has never reached out to me. I've reached out to him many times, and never once has he reached back out to sit down and see where we want to go. And we just want a better life for all of our Aboriginal people, our grassroots people, and it's not much to ask for.
All right, Chief St. Pierre, we really appreciate you joining us on Forum Daily and sharing your message. The top general in the U.S. has called the 20-year war in Afghanistan a strategic failure. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has also told Congress that he favored keeping several thousand troops in the country. This to prevent a collapse of the U.S.-supported Kabul government and a rapid takeover by the Taliban. General Milley refused to say what advice he gave to President Joe Biden. U.S. consumer confidence has declined for the 3rd straight month this September. The Conference Board reports that its consumer confidence index fell to a reading of 109.3 in September. This is down from 115.2 in August. The board says consumers' view of both the present situation and future expectations continue to degrade. This as intentions for spending on big items like homes, autos, and major appliances all retreated again. Concerns about inflation are also dampening consumer sentiment. Japan's former foreign minister, Fumio Kishida, has won the governing party leadership election and is set to become the next prime minister. Mr. Kishida replaces outgoing party leader, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, who is stepping down after serving only 1 year. As new leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, Mr. Kishida is certain to be elected as the next prime minister on Monday in Parliament. This is where his party and coalition partner will control the House. Haiti's prime minister says he plans to hold a referendum to modify the country's constitution by February 2022, and he hopes to organize elections early next year. In an interview on Tuesday with the Associated Press, Ariel Henry dismissed opponents who accused him of wanting to stay in power. He said that mistrust is one of the biggest challenges he faces. Mr. Henry said the referendum is a priority because the current constitution is rejected by a majority of political figures and civil society leaders. Britain's government plans to allow researchers to use gene editing techniques to develop crops. Gene editing could help scientists to quickly breed crops that are more nutritious or resistant to pests and diseases. The government announced the plan to make it easier for researchers to conduct studies in the field. Scientists draw a distinction between gene editing, which involves the manipulation of genes with a single species, and genetic modification, which moves DNA from one species into a different one. Cities across China are enforcing power cuts to meet official conservation targets. Factories in China's busiest manufacturing provinces have been ordered to suspend production for up to a week. This is prompting concern that global supplies of smartphones and other goods might be disrupted. Now, urban neighborhoods are being blacked out. News reports blame high coal prices, saying that they make power companies reluctant to meet demand. But officials are also under pressure to curtail energy use in order to meet official targets. North Korea says it successfully tested a new hypersonic missile as it continues to expand its military capabilities. The missile test early Tuesday was North Korea's third round of launches this month. It took place as the North tries to pressure Washington and Seoul over long-stalled negotiations over its nuclear weapons. North Korea's state media implied the missile met certain technical requirements, suggesting it was being developed as nuclear capable. The United Nations humanitarian chief calls the crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region a stain on our conscience. The Tigray region is under what the UN calls a de facto government blockade of food, medical supplies, and fuel. In an interview with the Associated Press, Martin Griffiths said memories of Ethiopia's 1980s famine, whose images shocked the world, are vivid in his mind, and he hopes it is not happening at present. Ukraine on Wednesday marked the 80th anniversary of the Babi Yar massacre during World War II. Babi Yar, a ravine in the Ukraine capital, Kiev, is where nearly 34,000 Jews were killed within 48 hours in 1941, when the city was under Nazi occupation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky laid out flowers at the monument to the victims of the massacre. Well, starting Wednesday, YouTube will block all anti-vaccine content. The video-sharing tech platform announced it will block and remove false claims that vaccines are dangerous and cause health issues like autism, cancer, or infertility. The tech company also deleted accounts belonging to notable individuals who propagated vaccine misinformation and conspiracy theories. The ban on vaccine misinformation extends to all approved immunizations as countries struggle to ramp up vaccination rates during the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, a little bit of kindness can go a long way, even in the classroom. This includes the university classroom. Dr. John Tyler Binfet and Dr. Sally Stewart at UBC recently published a study into how including a kindness assignment in an undergraduate course impacted students. Dr. Binfet says being kind brings a number of benefits like stress reduction, happiness, and peer acceptance. The study was published in the Journal of Further and Higher Education. All right, I'm Nima Rajan. Thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily Weekend Review, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, Canada.